Good morning. I'm Brian Beagley. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Informed 360. We're a technology startup company, and I'm the former vice president of compliance at Johnson Controls, which when I joined the company was a Fortune 75 company with about $44 billion in revenue and 170,000 employees worldwide. And maybe to kick off, I don't know how many of you read or get Fortune magazine, but in the most recent edition there was an article on a gentleman by the name of Eric Ries, who wrote The Lean Startup. Anybody read The Lean Startup? So if you own or operate in a software company, you read The Lean Startup because it's how to basically build and run software companies. But the premise of it is actually based on lean principles in terms of how to operate from a process-oriented approach. And I know for Ritu, GE has implemented, in fact, I think they've had him speak at many events. So we'll talk a little bit about that today, talk about what it means to have a process around continuous improvement. And for many of you in the room today, much like I found at Johnson Controls and my employer before that, Nike, we had lean experts within the company. So how can we take things like Lean, Six Sigma, process improvement and bring it to bear in the ethics and compliance world? So with that, I'll ask Ritu to introduce herself and talk a little bit about what you do.
Sure. Thank you so much, Brian. And good morning, everybody. It's absolute pleasure to be here. So my name is Ritu Jain. I lead the compliance function for GE in the Asia region. So I cover South Asia, Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea, and Australia, New Zealand. And the way we are organized is, we are matrix between different GE businesses, which have their own compliance officers, and we cover regions. So as a regional compliance officer, my job is to make sure that we are mitigating the business-specific risk in the region that the business exists in. Just to take off a little, just to introduce you to the topic as is relevant for GE. GE, as we all know, the operations have evolved following principles of Lean and Six Sigma, primarily in the manufacturing processes and new product developments. And over time, and there was a time in GE where everybody had to be certified Six Sigma. Those times have sort of evolved now, and we brought Eric Ries, who's written this book, The Lean Startup, in 2012 to really rethink in the way we operate. And you know how a big company, a juggernaut like GE, finds it difficult to implement any process. And we were had this perfectionist mentality where you sort of do everything before you go to market. And what we learned from Eric is this whole concept of fast works, which we have codified and has become a mindset in GE, where we are applying the principles of agile, the software development, the agile methodology, and we can talk more as we go, on how we really approach problem solving, not just in manufacturing, not just in new product development, but actually in the way we operate for each and every function. So I will let others sort of introduce, but we can sort of come back to talk about how we're applying this methodology of fast works in ethics and compliance in GE.
That's great. Thank you, Ritu. David?
Hi, I'm David Deachman, and yeah, I echo thank you all for taking the time to join us in this cozy room, it appears. So I am the Chief Ethics Compliance Officer and lead HR lawyer for HP Inc. That's the printer and PC side of Hewlett-Packard after we split about 2 years ago, as opposed to Glenn Leon, who you heard from yesterday. We are now peers and not in the same company. We are, after HP separated, we're a small 55,000 employee company operating in 170 countries, employees in about 120 countries around the world. My team is a global team. We're all really core and centralized, although I have people spread around the world. They all report into me as opposed to in the business units. For HP, we've actually implemented leadership principles across the company that include a growth mindset. This idea that no matter how good or bad you are, you can always improve. And we are pushing that concept out to every employee in the company. What we don't do is do it in a very structured way. We are constantly, it's now part of kind of what we're really trying to achieve as a company is continuously improving. But as opposed to a lean program, Six Sigma kind of thing, it is not structured. And so that's one of the things that I think I can bring into the conversation is how you can do some concepts here, even though you aren't measuring every little thing, and talk about some of the ways that you can still do some things there.
Great. Thank you, David.
Great. Good morning. My name is Steve Guyman. I work for Eli Lilly Pharmaceuticals. We are based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. We have operations in about 120 countries, 40,000 people, and we are a continuously owned company since May 10th, 1876. And the reason I bring that up is about 15 years into our company's journey, one of the sons of the founder was actually focused on continuous improvement and given that assignment to start to drive that as part of our culture. So early on, that became part of our culture. It's continued. In ethics compliance, it specifically has continued. I'm in a role now where I'm the senior advisor of capabilities, so really looking to say how do we drive continuous improvement and qualification of our staff. And it's something where we really try to apply the principles of Lean and Six Sigma. We brought Lean and Six Sigma to Lilly in 2003, and the first black belt at Lilly was our Chief Ethics Compliance Officer, my boss, Melissa Barnes. And so a couple of years after she came into the role, about a year after she came into the role, she came to me and said, I have a great opportunity for you. You're going to be the first black belt dedicated exclusively to ethics compliance. So I had that role. My initial response was, oh boy, what did I do wrong? But it was a great experience and great opportunity. We have about 150 people across the world. 25 of them are certified in Lean and Six Sigma. And so it's good to have that capability, but it also is something in the everyday tasks that we're all trying to do. It's difficult to apply it at times. So, part of the discussion I think we need to have and share is how do we take this whole approach of continuous improvement, some of the methodologies and approaches, and how do we take that back to the basic understanding our risks and the elements of an effective program, and how do we really be able to prioritize and say where can we make the differences, and how do we use these methodologies to make our programs better and better.
Great. Thank you, Steve. And again, let's keep this open. So if you have questions as we go along, feel free to raise your hand. Maybe just a quick poll. So how many companies in the room have a formal approach to continuous improvement within the ethics and compliance organization? So fair to say under half.
Yeah.
I won't put anybody out.
Well, under.
Yeah. Maybe Steve, start off with you. So you talked a little bit about it right there at the end, but how does your company kind of define continuous improvement? You said it's a formal structure, but what exactly does that mean within the organization?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and it's something that we are always trying to better understand and to better define. So, if you look to say what is continuous improvement really starts with having a defined understanding of what's the current state, and what are our objectives, and what are our goals, and are we making progress at improving, and what are the key problems and issues that we need to solve. So, really understanding that current state and then saying how are we going to deploy our limited resources and do it in a very strategic way to where we could have some tactical actions to really be able to say how do we improve. So, our goal is the same as yours. How do we make our program better? How do we make our culture better? And how do we do that? So one of the things that we've really done over the last few years is to really step back and to try to say how do we really get a good understanding in a very simplified manner, make sure that we're engaging all of our business leaders and all of our functions and geographies and doing risk assessments and coming up with what are the prioritized risks, and then what are the mitigation plans that they put in place, and then how do we build and develop our ethics compliance program for the 7 elements around that. And that starts to give us the ability to say we understand what the risks are in each geography, in each function. We engage the business leaders to really help us to say how are we going to drive towards improvement of mitigating those risks and driving our culture. And then we've set up some systems and tools to be able to report that and to be able to have a just-in-time view to understand what the status of our program is in any geography, any affiliate, and then to aggregate that data. It's imperfect, but it's really helped us. And it's really started by saying, what's the current state, what's the status, and are we getting better or worse?
Okay, great. You too? How about from your
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit more about how we apply FastWorks into ethics and compliance. So if you think about FastWorks and a new product introduction, the way software companies do it, they don't come out with the final product to the market. Like you may have seen, like they will push like a version 1, and they will see like what are the bugs, what needs to be fixed, and then they would take the immediate response from the customer, they would go back and then they would fix it and they'll come back with version 2, right? So they don't try to fix everything because the underlying philosophy is actually the customer also doesn't know what they want. Now they don't, right? They need to feel it, experience it, and then they can tell you. So any market survey that we do in new product development, it doesn't really help till the time you've sort of tried that out. Now, when you bring that to ethics and compliance, who's our customer? The employees. They are a customer. And we were in sessions yesterday where we were saying that we as compliance professionals, we think what the risks are. And we decide what trainings we need to do. And we decide how we want to do those trainings. Not necessarily the employee agrees with us, right? They're like, and they always look at us as somebody who's sitting on the other side of the table. So the way you think about FastWorks and this agile or lean, you can call whatever, is to really test it out with the employees. So we say, and I want to pick on the topic on risk assessment. The way we do risk assessment is quite embedded in the way we think about continuous improvement. One way of risk assessment is you have a set of leaders, managers, they all come in a room and they say, hey, what are our big risks and how are we mitigating that? But in GE, we actually have a tops down and a bottoms up risk approach. So every 18 months, every GE business starts doing what we call a risk roll-up process, where each and every employee discusses with their manager what they think the risks are. So every frontline manager has a discussion with their team. Then they go back and those managers have a discussion with their manager. And like that, it sort of gets boiled up at a business level and then finally at a company level. So then we match, here was the management's view of risk. Here is what we have rolled up from, and then you find out the unknown unknowns, because for all you know, the people on the ground have a different perception of risk than what the management was thinking. If it matches, great. Not only does it help define the risk and give us a new perspective of how we think about risk, this is an immense value add from a culture standpoint, because when that employee, that field guy sees his or her manager talk about risk, it immediately gives them a sense of, he or she cares more about more than targets and deadlines, and they are actually talking about what are the risks in our operations. And so it helps us from a culture perspective, but this is the way we actually continuously improve, because we take a blend of bottoms up, tops down, and we do that every 18 months and on an ongoing basis to continuously reassess where our risks are and what actions we are taking. So,
and in addition to that, are you like testing things with certain stakeholder groups before it gets released out into, say, the general? So I think about it in terms of doing a large global risk assessment. Do you structure something and then send it out to a small stakeholder group, get feedback, tweak it, and then send it out?
So we do this risk assessment exercise, like I said, formally, because it is a sort of a huge process in once in 18 months or sometimes once a year. But then what we do, we have a sort of a quarterly rhythm of compliance review boards where we prioritize those risks, we take it to the review board, very, very action-oriented discussion, and say, hey, here's what we are seeing. And then we revisit every quarter to see if those are the same risk, because, guess what? We're living in a very uncertain world. The biggest difference between Six Sigma and FastWorks is that FastWorks bake in the biggest hypothesis of uncertainty. You know that what is today is not going to be tomorrow, and you need to bake in for that, which Six Sigma didn't have that underlying philosophy. So by revisiting that every quarter, we are able to test whether is this still relevant, and if it's not relevant, we quickly pivot or persevere. So pivot is when you quickly course correct and you say, we're not going to waste more time on this. Something else has come up. persevere is yes, this is still relevant and will continue.
Because I think Eric says in the Lean Startup, it's about developing products under conditions of extreme uncertainty.
Yes.
How you
Which
do
is what
that.
I'm sure we are all agreeing, right? Like as compliance and ethics professional, we are operating in extreme uncertainty, politically, geographically, product-wise. Our sales teams are very creative, you know. They think about new
She said
ways
politely.
of going to the market, and you have to keep pace with that. Otherwise, you know, you're redundant if you can't talk to them in their language.
Well, and David, we talked not only just about kind of the conditions of uncertainty, but of change. So when organizations are going through a lot of change, and I know HP has gone through a lot of change, but could you can talk about kind of the definition of continuous improvement and how do you keep continuous improvement going when you've got periods of significant change in an organization?
Yeah, we've done a couple of things. We have not defined continuous improvement, just to be clear. We do think about how can we constantly be doing our jobs better. But how many of you have gone through budget cuts? Okay. I got tired of this idea of having to take my budget, meet my budget, what's the head count, how many do I have to end with the silos, and okay, I got to take another head count out just to meet my budget, and now how do I keep getting all the work done? And so I worked with my team to think about how can we do it differently. What's whether it's the work, okay, we've taken all the work out of the system, that we have to do all the rest of the work we have left. Okay, what can we do differently? And so we restructured. We set up a different team that was a program management team that would support the entire ethics compliance function. And then thought, okay, this is going to be great. We're excited about this. We're going to be able to do more with the resources we have because we're leveraging more. And feedback came in pretty quickly that it was not working. And that's part of the process, is getting that feedback quickly and listening to it. I like your idea of either pivot or persevere. I hadn't thought of it in those words, but this was my baby. I wanted this new structure, and we were going to make this work. And I had to listen to my team tell me I was wrong. And it was hard. I was a failure. But I did. I had to really think about, okay, what does that mean for us? Because we need to be able to have a team that can adapt to the next budget cut, to the next shift in business needs. And if what we're all been doing all along isn't going to be it, it has to be something else. But is that something else still the right one? We got to be able to change that too. And so we did. Within 6 months, my team realized sooner. I accepted within 6 months that it wasn't persevere, that it needed to pivot. And we thought about, okay, what's the next structure? And we've readjusted again, pivoted back a little bit. The pendulum has come back a bit. And now for the last 3 or months or so, we've been trying a slightly modified structure with the whole idea that when something else comes along, when we decide, we're in 3D printing now, but when 3D printing is suddenly going to print a medical device, I don't know, we're not a medical company. Are we going to be able to adapt to the ethics and compliance needs for that new business based on our new structure? And trying to plan for the unknown that I don't even know what it might be remotely. Not from a substantive, but from a structural and capability standpoint, will we be able to meet those needs when they come? I don't know that we're there, but that's what we're trying to be there for.
Yeah, thank you. Question, please.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on your organizational change? What were you trying to leverage and what did you think didn't work? Go through the same process, I'd love to hear.
So we set up what I'd call a center of excellence, I guess, is a set of program managers that would be generalists, that they could do some privacy program implementation or anti-corruption program implementation or policy rollout, and they could do it all. Still have some core subject matter experts for each of those areas. I went too far. I took away too much from the core teams and realized we needed more expertise to actually do some of the program stuff than I thought was possible. So I put some more back into the subject matter expertise teams, made that COE smaller, and with the idea that they're extra power as opposed to more of the doing. They're that. I came from a law firm. We had a secretarial pool, is actually what it was called at the time, and I could hand them any document and they could type it up for me, and it didn't matter whether it was a pleading to file in court or a letter. Didn't take expertise on their part. That's my idea here, is that people that are good program managers that can go out and figure out where in the company we need to bring in the right people to get something done. And I had to back off, and yes, those kind of people are going to be valuable for our team and are valuable. Fewer of them than I thought.
Thanks.
So, David, one of the things I'm just hearing in your discussion is I think many of us have been through, various iterations of our programs, from how do you stand up an ethics compliance program to get the basics in place, to then really how are we really influencing the culture, and how are we integrating with the business. And this is where I think continuous improvement is just, the principles are very important, because I'll always go back to what I take away from my Lean and Six Sigma experiences are, how do you make sure you understand the current state? How do you make sure you understand what the goal is or any problems we're trying to solve? And then to Brian's point, what is the voice of the customer? How are you getting that feedback loop to really understand where you are? And if you think about the challenges we run into day to day, people will say our procedures, our policies are just really confusing. We don't know what to do. This is actually part of a continuous improvement effort we made a few years ago. And it really takes some discipline and dedication to be able to say our current state is our policies and procedures are really confusing. We want to engage employee groups, to put focus groups together, to be able to better integrate into the business and make them really simple. So we went from having scores of policies to having 11. And all of those policies are very simplified, and they're one paragraph or less. They're no more than 3 sentences. Getting there and making that continuous improvement to get to a policy that regulates all aspects of our business took tremendous discipline and effort to get there. So when we want to make those continuous improvements, we've got to figure out what are we going to do, what are we not going to do. And then when we went through the process of saying, okay, we're going to align our procedures that go with these in all geographies and functions related, starting with anti-corruption, and then to put simplified procedures in place. Again, that's where some of the disciplines of continuous improvement and really planning your work and putting execution plans together and making sure that you have metrics that are reporting out on how we're proceeding along the way and ensuring we have that business partner feedback loop are really important.
So I would also touch upon the org point, because we are talking about how our organization needs to continuously evolve based on how your business is changing. So, there was a time, 6 or 7 years ago where 60% of GE's revenue was US-based and 40% was international. And then we realized that it can be like that. So there was a whole organization, the Global Growth Organization, that was set up in GE, where we were planning to flat plant, our businesses, our talent in geographies like Africa and Vietnam and Southeast Asia, and, India. And that's the moment this organization was set up, we had to relook at the way we were organized in compliance. So earlier, where most of our resources were concentrated in headquarters, we said that can no longer be. So we had a very extensive presence in the regions to manage and understand and implement the compliance program at a regional level. So I think it had to be almost like simultaneous. It's going to be like, because otherwise, when it comes to risk, and it comes to risk in high risk, geographies like this, you can't wait and watch and then take a decision. So how agile you are as an organization to continuously revamp. And now we are 70%, 65 to 70% of our revenues is outside of US, and we continuously recalibrate, is that where our resources are from a compliance standpoint.
So it's fair to say that continuous improvement touches a lot of different aspects of your program, org structure included. Let's talk about some tangible aspects of continuous improvement, because again, I go back to my initial premise, is that everybody talks about continuous improvement, but what exactly is it? What exactly does that mean? It can't just be, hey, we revised our code of conduct, or we closed an investigation, right? Continuous improvement is more than that. So what are the tools and methodologies that you use in order to further continuous improvement? So for example, both at Johnson Controls and at Nike, I ran the risk and the compliance teams through lean training. We didn't require them to be black belts, but it was interesting to see not only were you building teamwork, but you were getting after kind of that methodology around problem solving, right? Because a lot of times what we want to do as professionals is just jump straight to the solution. And Steve, I know you mentioned earlier, right, about that process of actually getting to the solution. There's a lot of pre-work that has to be done before that. So, David, maybe you could talk a little bit about kind of tools, methodologies, things that you employ and use, so there's some tangible takeaways for the audience that they can think about.
I'm not the right person. No. I am not a process guy. I am fairly disorganized in my thought often, and my desk is a mess. I have learned in this job, process is valuable. It actually makes a difference. So one example, we do our risk assessment program. We call it a compliance assessment program. We work with all of the 26 different compliance functions around the company that are embedded in various places, the business units and regions, to identify risk and really help them understand what are the risks facing their business and what are the opportunities. And then also looking at, are the programs operating effectively? We use that program to ask them questions to identify what are your risks. Have you thought about, last year you were doing that, okay, you've got that. Where are you headed? And we ask them those kind of questions. It is a very basic tool. We use a SharePoint to track answers, and we have calls and conversations. So that's one way we're talking to them about, are you thinking about where your business is headed and what the legal and regulatory risks may be that will impact those business objectives. The next step we take, though, is we then ask them, are we doing this well? And it is as basic as that. We want to improve our compliance assessment program next year so that we're getting them better information and better results that they can take action on to mitigate the risks that will impact their business strategy. And again, it's having those phone calls with them and saying, are we adding value to you? Is there something we can be doing differently or better? And then building that back into our process for our next year's process.
Yeah, and Dave, to be fair, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this or that, because one company has a more formalized approach to continuous improvement that what you do at HP or any other company that doesn't have as formalized is not an invalidation of what you do at all. I mean, that's.
I think we could do it better.
I feel like it's a start. Continuous improvement, right?
How's
exactly.
that? Yeah.
Now, Steve, I know you guys have some formal methodologies and processes that you employ, including root cause analysis and how you build and structure around the program elements. If you could talk a little bit about that, I think it would be very interesting as well for the audience.
Yeah, so you get over 20 people who are black belts in ethics compliance together, and you just create a total geek session.
I thought you were going to say party, but
and it's interesting because part of what we've had to do is to step back and, again, I'll be very simplistic and very focused, but understand the risks, understand how our program is performing. We do formal assessments of our program in various geographies throughout the year. But as we are going through and doing our monitoring or investigations, one of the things we've really had to be disciplined on is to say, how are we really stopping and how are we saying what actually caused these issues? Yeah. So root cause analysis, it sounds easy. Just show of hands, how many of you in here would consider yourself to be competent at root cause analysis? Yeah. Few hands went up. Okay, I'm kind of going like this, and I spend a lot of time.
I can ask the 5 whys until I get to the 5th why, and then I kind of stop and burn out.
But it's really important because there are some simple tools, and even with all of these folks on our team, it really takes focus and discipline. So over the last couple of years, we've spent a lot of time. Whenever there's a monitoring finding that results in an investigation, we assign it one of 5 key root causes, and we've really tried to be disciplined on this. What we really are pushing is to then say, how are we do not define that root cause. We sit down with the business, and we use the 5 whys, and we come up with various problem statements to run them through. And then we force the business to help us to understand what actually caused it, what are the corrective actions they're going to put in place to actually resolve this issue, but more importantly, what are the preventives that we can put in place, and then how do we start to prospectively monitor and assess, are we getting better? And that sounds very basic, very easy. It takes a lot of time and a lot of discipline to do this. When we're trying to get our business partners to engage with us in these discussions, you all know that's very difficult.
Do you ever get pushback?
Absolutely we do. Yeah. And the most important thing we can do is to get senior leadership buy-in, to be able to say, how do we actually, when we get that pushback, the workaround we've done is to be able to say, well, we're going to show the status of root cause corrective or preventative actions where we haven't gotten business engagement to those individuals' leaders, and it changes the dialogue very quickly and gets the business to say, this isn't an ethics compliance issue, this is a business operations issue. And how do we fix that?
Thank you. You too? How about
So I really like that example because, one thing we are extremely passionate about in GE is culture. And we also, the big $1 million question is, how do you measure culture, right? So we have what our whistleblower program is called Ombuds and Open Reporting Program, which really essentially means that an employee can report a concern to several channels, including starting from their manager to 1-over-1 to legal, ethics, compliance, hotline, ombuds, and so on and so forth. And it's really worked for us because, the volumes we get through this channel, we almost get like 3,000 concerns a year across GE, which is an amazing set of data. Now, what could you do? What could you possibly do with that data? And we have actually used that data as a reflection of our culture. So you talked about root cause. So there was a time where we would just investigate a concern and say confirmed or not confirmed. We said that's not enough. We need to know if something happened, why it happened. Was it a lack of training? Was it a lack of, was it individual misbehavior? Was it pressure from leadership? We have all those categories, and we actually, every concern has to be closed only after it can identify that root cause. The other way we use this immense data is to take a reflection of our, metrics. So, for example, if we get a very high number of concerns with anonymous reporting, it actually tells us that our employees, they're reporting concerns, but they're not comfortable sharing their identity. Is it a fear of retaliation? Is it because, is it cultural? So we actually hold our leaders accountable to that metric. And we say, hey, in your business, your 50% of your concerns are anonymous. What are you doing about it? And we think of ways for them to engage better, and we can actually measure that quarter over quarter. Are the number of concerns that are anonymous going down? The other way, how do we link this reporting to our risk assessment? So if collectively we've identified cyber as a high risk, and we are not seeing enough concerns coming for cyber, that is a gap. If it is a risk, we should be getting concerns on that because clearly issues are happening. So then we deploy our training methodology and a training focus to, say, cyber. And we can immediately see the reporting change. I've almost been in sessions where I have talked about a topic and you leave that session and 1 week later you get concerns on the topic because it's about awareness, So we heavily leverage confirmation rates. So if I get 100 concerns and my confirmation is 60%, that could mean two things. One, I have a real issue here, or it could mean that there is a better awareness on the topic. We want more concerns, but we don't want same concerns because that means we're not really fixing it. So there is, we always struggle with data and how to measure culture. I think using this data in our open reporting and whistleblower program is such an amazing reflection for us, and it keeps us and our leaders. We say, this is not a reflection of compliance. This is a reflection of you, your leader, your business, and we are measuring you, and they are measured by their leaders on these metrics. So it's worked pretty well for us.
Good. Steve, did you have something to?
Yeah, well, one of the things I just want to really reemphasize this whole root cause because it is really, really important for us as a function, a profession, to figure out how do we define what good looks like in root cause together and to really share this. So, Erica Salmon-Byrne has had a working group that started to look at this. And, those of you in the audience who have expertise in this area, please reach out to Erica to help on this. Because one of the things we want to be able to do is to say, how do we influence what the perspective is of what good looks like? So what are generally accepted root cause categories? How do we want to define that? So that when any of us start to have questions from regulatory bodies, that we're able to say, you know what, this was human factor. this was process, this was process design. Whatever we decide those terms are, it's really important that we figure out how to do this together, and we come up with some standard nomenclature.
So you can't do root cause analysis on everything. Well, I mean, I guess in theory you could, right? But I've heard, a consistent theme around limited resources. So, David, I'll start with you. How do you prioritize continuous improvement? Like, how do you determine what you're going to focus on? Is it budget related? Is it resource related? Is it these are the main things that we see either through the helpline, or this is a piece of the program that we know is broken? Like, what process do you use to figure out what you're going to prioritize to improve?
All of that.
Because you're not going to do it all.
Yeah. Building on a couple things that Ritu and Steve said is I don't have to make all the decisions. The feedback loop is tremendously valuable to make some of those decisions. And the ideas that we get out of that feedback loop that come from the business, from my boss, from HR, I report into our general counsel. Sometimes priority is because someone at the executive leadership team said this is a priority. Okay, that's a pretty good indicator of what they think is important for the company. I can bounce that off of others, though. I don't always have to listen to the one voice, and I can listen to other voices as well. I very much take into account risk. That's our job, is understanding the risk to the company's priorities. Not just because I think it's a big risk, but is it a risk to what the company strategy is? So I build that in. It's not numerical or mathematical, but and it has to do with both short-term and long-term. And to be able to evaluate that risk to the company's priorities, I need to understand what the company is trying to accomplish. I need to have enough business acumen on myself and on my team to understand what they're trying to achieve so that we can help them achieve it with our priorities as well. I'll just come back to what I said about that feedback loop. Asking those questions of the business about what their priorities are and what are their ideas. They want to do more than maybe I can accomplish. Use them. Let them go do, with your oversight and help, and make sure they're doing it in the direction that it fits in with the overall program. But let them implement some of these great ideas. Let them pilot it. The idea of doing something quickly, it works great. Maybe there's a way to expand it. If it doesn't work, you learn something from it. And that's part of the continuous improvement loop as well.
So do companies in the audience, do you use pilot programs with your compliance program? Anybody just send things out? Steve, how about from the Lilly standpoint in terms of prioritization?
Yeah, it's really going to be driven by risk more than anything. And, much like GE, I think we've all shared and we've come to these integrated risk processes where we'll have our local risks, our functional risks, feed up into our enterprise risk management process, and then have a cycle where that'll feed back through. And that really helps us to say, okay, so we don't have endless resources. How are we going to make decisions on where we could apply things like root cause analysis? Where are we going to go ahead and focus in on where do we put control charting methodology and other aspects in place to say where are we seeing outliers? And we don't have infinite resources just like the rest of the group. We have a lot of resources because of our industry, high expectations. We have a relatively small team within the biopharmaceutical industry of about 150, which a lot of people look around and go, wow, that's a lot, But that means we have to make decisions, just like you. And so the decisions are going to be risk-based. And the ability to engage leadership to prioritize early, what are the risks we're going to mitigate, and how are they going to go ahead and help us to report out on the success of that? It's really important. The other fact would be the risks are going to change during the year. Mm-hmm. So how are we continuously monitoring what the external environment is and what the changes in the business process are so that we have some flexibility to update those risks and the prioritization as time goes on.
Ritu, how about from the GE?
Yeah, so again, we look at compliance as twofold, culture and risk. When it comes to culture, it's non-negotiable because for GE, we believe that you can have all the rules and all the processes and all the audits. If you don't have the right DNA and you don't have the right culture, none of that matters. So when it comes to culture, there is absolutely, there is really no question of prioritization because that's the priority. When it comes to risk, we pretty much do what you guys do, what everybody does. You prioritize based on impact, based on probability, based on where the business is going. The business tells you what the risks are, what's the priority. But the other thing that we really believe in is compliance is not compliance, is business. Like I said, we hold, to be a leader in GE is a really big deal because they have a lot of responsibility. It's really something that they feel very strongly about. And when they feel strongly about it, they own it. We have 360,000 plus employees across 172 countries. We have a couple of hundred compliance professionals. So the only way we are managing it is we as compliance have the vantage view of risk, but we hold people accountable. And the way we hold accountable is by conducting what I just mentioned before, compliance review boards, where at each P&L level, at a sub-P&L level, every quarter, it is a dedicated compliance meeting that is not set up by compliance, but is set up by the leader of that platform, which brings in the leader and their staff, HR, finance, sourcing, IT, EHS, sales leads. They come together, they look at risk, and they own the risk. And they have to talk about, one, what are they doing about the risk? Everybody agrees. Second, whether they need help. So that makes our job much easier. We just have to keep them honest. And that really, I think that's a good position to be in. But that's how we prioritize. Culture is non-negotiable. And yeah, you had a...
Does that committee just discuss compliance risk, or is it more enterprise risk, which includes business-related risk?
So it's focused on compliance risk. So for example, it would not cover whether we should invest in this site or not. So we don't cover that. We cover compliance risk, but that's a broad-based compliance risk. That is not just limited to anti-bribery, anti-corruption. It could be sexual harassment. It could be IT security. It could be new regulation. So it is very compliance risk focused. It doesn't cover business sort of, commercial decision making. We keep that separate.
Let's talk about monitoring and measurement. So I guess maybe the holy grail. What's the metric that you use to track or measure yourself from a continuous improvement standpoint? David, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, you set me up for that. I would say this is one of the areas I don't think we do well. We don't have a true metric on, I would say, on the effectiveness of the improvements to our program in ethics and compliance. We do an employee survey every year that includes, I think, 4 ethics-related questions. We actually get very high scores on those, 82 to 84% positive, and it's really hard to increase that number. And I don't know if that's a measure of our program or not. I think it's partly, but I'll take credit for it. Don't get me wrong. At the board, I'm saying it's us, but I don't know that when we revise our policy to be more simple, when we have a better training program that gets really good feedback, there's a measurement point. Mm-hmm. I don't think we have a really good way to measure that our changes are actually driving better business and ethical decisions in the company.
So Steve, you're a metric-driven company.
We're a very metric-driven company.
So you've got it, right?
No. And I think it's important because, part of what happened in the biopharmaceutical industry is in the late 90s, a lot of behaviors occurred that really put our industry in not the light we want to be held in, and a lot of enforcement occurred. So a lot of organizations ended up with government monitors, expectations with settlements, corporate integrity agreements that would say you have to do these things to be able to prove you have an effective program. Well, that actually, to me, doesn't prove an effective program. By making sure that you have policies and procedures for the key risks and training is done and communication, we do that, we track that, but I think ultimately it comes down to what is the culture and what are the behaviors that we're seeing day to day? Because we can have a programmatic aspect. You can put a lot of measures and metrics on the programmatic aspect, but is that truly showing effectiveness? So, I think one of the key lessons many of us have learned is having third parties assess our program and to really come in and challenge us to say, are we not just running a program for metrics and measures? Are we running a program for effectiveness to drive the behaviors and the culture we want, and to report back to our board of directors? So, doing that, I think, is one of the best tools we've seen to say, is our program working or not? Because I think we can at times lose the big perspective on what's truly important to change the culture and to really drive to the behaviors and the business integrity activities that we want to see happening.
And you hit on a good point there about reporting out to the board of directors. So Ritu, what do you report out in terms of continuous improvement? Is it an agenda item on report outs to senior leadership and the board of directors? And if so, how do you do that?
So we report the health of our compliance program every quarter to our board of directors, and that includes I talked about ombuds metrics, so that includes every possible analysis of that, and that's a regular standing item. The other thing, I think we mentioned culture surveys, which we all do, but the key to culture surveys is, what are the questions you're asking? Like, are we asking general questions? Because like it or not, perception, the employee perception, is a big reflection on the health of your compliance program. We actually started embedding some very specific questions like, does your manager talk about risk with you? Do you, have you ever been in a situation where you've seen a red flag but not been able to report it? So a lot depends upon the kind of questions you're asking. And over time, we've evolved those questions in our culture survey. The other, thing that our leadership did, which was fantastic, was when we get the results of these culture surveys, we publish them everywhere. So each GE business leader globally gets their score, and everybody can see it. And that's a big deal for that leader if they compare their scores with other scores. So, and that gets drilled down to regions, to sub-P&Ls in the region. So I think there is a huge value in those surveys by defining the kind of questions and using the result of the survey to measure. And we actually share that with our, board and our audit committee, along with, what I talked about, the ombuds metrics and specifically.
So is your survey part of a larger sort of employee survey on other cultural issues? So do you have a specific set of questions, like Steve mentioned, that relate to your cultural elements?
Yes, so we try to embed it in the broader survey, and we have specific questions that give a reflection on the culture of compliance and, open reporting.
Do you report it as an index, or do you report it as responses to individual questions?
Responses to individual questions, yes. Because we show overall and we show responses to individual questions. That's important.
And is there any other data element that you're putting in that, like number of reported incidents or number of substantiated incidents, or is it truly just you're relying on that survey to give you that outcome?
For that survey, we totally rely on that survey because that's the employee's VOC, right? I mean, that should... Nobody can discount that. We don't muddle with any other data point. But when we're thinking about overall action planning, we do add our, our learnings and insights from, things like risk assessment and ombuds and whistleblower mechanism reporting, and then we add to that survey.
Yeah, our survey doesn't have that level of detail in the questions, but we marry that up in our program against where are we seeing incidents or not, and what kind of incidents are we seeing. We had an example, one of our countries was relatively low in one of the questions, and they had a big push on anti-retaliation and a couple things in that country, and the next year the survey responses were more positive. For our board, we report out changes to the program. Again, not data. We give all the data every meeting. They get the full slides with all the charts and pretty colors. And then if we're doing anything different, we're telling them about it. And I think the important part of that is I'm thinking ahead. What are the questions they're going to ask about what we're doing? Why are you doing it? What do you hope to achieve by it? And then, of course, how do you know if you've achieved it? And that's the one I still feel the weakest on. But I'm planning ahead for the substantive conversation about, okay, great, you changed this. Why? What's the purpose for it? And I think that's the important conversation to have with them.
So it sounds like there's no real magic metric around continuous improvement. It sounds like it's kind of utilizing existing metrics that you have from other components of your program, but piecing them together to tell a compelling story about how your program is changing and improving over time, is what I'm hearing you Is that a fair
Yes.
statement? Okay. Maybe one last question in the time we have remaining here. So, my background, Fortune 500 companies, GE, I believe, is a Fortune 500, HP, Eli Lilly, so big companies, relatively large compliance organizations, sophisticated budgets and things like that. What recommendations would you have for companies in the room that are smaller in scope, smaller teams, maybe don't have the same amount of resources, for them to think about continuous improvement and how they might think about implementing continuous improvement within their own organizations? And after that, we'll open it up to any more questions.
Yeah, look, my thought is that let's not worry about the jargon. Let's not worry about the big stuff and the tools. Let's start with the basic. And again, I go back to culture. If you have your leadership buy-in and you can convince them on why it's important and use all of that information, I think that's a great starting point. There is really no cookie cutter approach to compliance. Pick what's relevant for your company, what's relevant for your operation, and start with culture. If you get that correct, everything else will follow. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I'd say you're not alone.
No.
Talk to this community. Talk to others in your company that are thinking about and trying to do continuous improvement. Leverage what they're learning. Maybe you can even do it together with them for their programs. Yours may marry, or you can just go at the same time and ask others the same kinds of questions. And don't be afraid of asking those questions of your stakeholders. Ask their opinion and be prepared for harsh answers. Be prepared for positive, hopefully. But ask. You're not alone.
Yeah. And I would say just engage your business partners and identify an issue you could work on together and determine how you could work with the business to say, how are we going to assess, have we made progress on this? Have we made something that was really complex and really difficult more easily understandable so that the business can run better? And if that's all you could do, you're going to have a pretty successful year, quarter, whatever it's going to be during that time period you do it. When you have a lot of resources, we're just doing a lot of little projects to do that. And when you have very limited resources, if you can just show that you're making progress and you're engaging with the business and you're all on the same team and trying to make that improvement, it really starts to create a collaborative mindset.
Thank you. Steve, David, Ritu, thank you so much. We probably have time for 1 or 2 questions. Yes.
Your risk assessment for anti-bribery, anti-corruption is separate to the...
No, so we bake in the anti-bribery and anti-corruption risk in our overall compliance risk assessment. But yes, that forms a big part of, because that's a big risk for our operations, so it forms a big part of our risk assessment.
Second question was, does the function or say the
Yes, they do. They have to. So you have to define what. So it could be a financial risk, it could be business continuity risk, it could be reputational risk, it could be regulatory risk. So you define the risk for them so that they think, when they're talking about risk assessment, they think about the impact along those lines. They have to think about reputational risk because for us, GE brand is our biggest asset.
Well, thank you for your time and appreciate it. I'm sure the panel will be around if you want to ask more questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.